Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome back to our unit guide series for Total War Pharaoh, as we continue today with the Upper Egyptian native units. Now for those who missed our previous guide on the Nubia and Kush native units, I highly recommend you to check it out using the link above or using the playlist linked in the description below to check out all the unit guides for Total War Pharaoh on the channel so far. Now, Total War Pharaoh utilizes a region-bound recruitment system where each realm in the game has a different pool of native units that can be recruited by the factions located there. In the case of Upper Egypt, the native unit roster is shared between 7 provinces located here, and this roster contains a total of 11 units, including one of the best offensive melee infantry units in the game. So let's get started by first taking a look at how to recruit each of these 11 units. Breaking these down into 4 tiers, we have the Upper Egyptian Militia Clubmen and the Upper Egyptian Militia Slingers in Tier 1, which means these units can be recruited as long as you control a Tier 1 settlement anywhere within the realm. Then Tier 2 contains the Upper Egyptian Conscripted Axemen and the Upper Egyptian Archers, which are both recruitable when you have the Tier 2 native recruitment building constructed. Now this is the first building in this building chain as it starts out in Tier 2. And if you upgrade the building to Tier 3, you gain access to Upper Egyptian Spearmen, Upper Egyptian Swordsmen, and Upper Egyptian Javelin throwers. Lastly, if you upgrade that building to Tier 4, which can only be done in a provincial capital, you gain access to the Upper Egyptian Renowned Archers, the Upper Egyptian Chariot, the Upper Egyptian Mace-Axe Warriors, and finally the Upper Egyptian Khopesh Warriors, as this group represents a very well-balanced and elite selection of units suitable for pretty much every situation in the game. Now with recruitment out of the way, let's break down the stats on each of these units, starting with the Upper Egyptian Militia Clubmen. As a Tier 1 Club and Shield Infantry unit, the Upper Egyptian Militia Clubmen plays a role of a cheap, expendable fodder unit. With 15,600 health spread across the standard 120 unit count, each model here will have 130 health. Armor is going to be on the low side with 30, and 15 of that will come from its shield, as we have very lightly armored unit here due to their specialization for desert combat. Armor quality is just average, and their shield is tiny, which gives them only a 25% range block chance. Morale is above average for a Tier 1 unit at 48. Speed is also slightly above average of 43. Melee attack of 23 and melee defense of 25 are pretty much in line with Tier 1 infantry. 5 points of the melee defense will come from the shield. Like all club infantry units in the game, all 23 of its melee damage will be armor piercing, and the charge bonus is decent at 19. More importantly, a lot of the Upper Egyptian melee infantry also carry a handful of projectiles that they will throw out as they charge at the enemy. And in the case of the Upper Egyptian Militia Clubmen, they have 3 ammos of this 50 range projectile that will deal 10 base damage, 1 armor piercing damage with an accuracy of just 8 and a reload time of just 4.5 seconds. The damage here is honestly really low, but it's an added bonus for melee infantry, so it's not bad to have. In terms of traits, we'll see the Upper Egyptian units are designed for desert combat with resiliency to desert attrition and resistance to heat, which negates smoldering heat penalties. They will also have shoot while moving for their projectile and the ability to hide in both shrubs and forests. They are expendable, which means routing will not affect the morale of nearby allies as long as they're also not expendable. Lastly, they have Armor Breaker, which gives them pretty much twice the amount of armor damage. Stance-wise, they only have the basic hold formation, which just keeps them organized when holding a position defensively. Overall, the Upper Egyptian Militia Clubman is a desert specialist that is cheap, expendable, and a great choice for sending charging first into the enemy's most heavily armored unit. While you might start with a bunch of these units in the early game due to the cost, in the mid to late game, you should only keep 1 or 2 of these units in your army if you want to keep any at all, because of how the expendable trait works, and their job in battle should either be running down enemy range units with their speed, or charging headfirst at the enemy's best infantry to slow them down and grind away at their armor, clearing the way for your better units to kill them more effectively later on. Now moving on, we have our second Tier 1 unit in the Upper Egyptian Militia Slingers, and they are basically the range variation of the Militia Clubmen. With 9,000 health and 90 units, or 100 health per unit, these guys are fragile, with only 10 armor of average quality. Morale is once again high, as with all Upper Egyptian native units at 43. Speed is also decent at 42, but the melee attack and melee defense are just average of 15 and 12. Surprisingly, the Militia Slinger also carries the club as their melee weapon, which gives them the same 23 armor piercing damage, but with only 15 melee attack, they're not going to be as effective. They have a respectable charge bonus of 16. In terms of their range stat, they have 32 ammo at 210 range and a missile damage of 15 and 2, split between base and armor piercing. Accuracy is only at 8, and reload time is at 6.3 seconds. In terms of traits and stance, the Militia Slingers have everything the Militia Clubmen have, except shoot while moving, as they don't have the handy projectile to throw out. They have the Slinger. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of Slinger units in general, due to their low damage output. Even with the superior range and higher ammo count, they will do very little damage, not to mention how low their accuracy is. And in terms of their melee capabilities, while the Militia Slingers are armed with the same club as the Militia Clubmen, their low defensive stats and most importantly low melee attack makes them quite useless in that front as well, as miss hits in melee will not apply any damage to enemy health or armor. So at the end of the day, the Upper Egyptian Militia Slingers are a unit that I simply do not recommend recruiting at all. Now moving to tier 2, we start with the Upper Egyptian Conscripted Axemen, which has 16,800 health spread across 120 units or 140 health per model. Its armor is still on the low end due to the Desert Specialization at 50, with 30 coming from its shield. The armor quality is average and the shield is up to par with 45% range block chance. Once again, the morale is way above average at 53 and speed is pretty decent at 41. Melee attack is very high at 33, and melee defense is also above average at 35 with 7 points coming from its shield. Their melee damage is very high and split 50-50 with 17 base and 17 armor piercing, and there's also a 5-point bonus against shield. However, their charge bonus is a tad below average for a tier 2 unit at just 19, but still pretty high, all things considered. In terms of traits, the Upper Egyptian Conscripted Axemen also shares the resilience for desert and resistance to heat and have the ability to hide in both shrubs and forests. Their only stance is hold, but they do have a unit ability called Aspire, which will give them 2 more points of melee attack and defense if there is an ally unit nearby with at least 60 morale. So in my opinion, the Upper Egyptian Conscripted Axemen is actually a powerhouse offensive melee infantry, especially considering it's only tier 2, so it's a very good early game offensive infantry. When used well as a flanking unit, their melee attack stat can reach almost 70 points, considering the bonuses from flanking, charge bonus, bonus versus shield, and the Spire bonus all factored in. And to trigger the Spire bonus, just have these units fight near your general or other elite unit that you might have, and combine this with their high melee damage, and the Upper Egyptian Conscripted Axemen will make short work of any enemy unit. Then for the next tier 2 unit, we have the Upper Egyptian Archer, which is your stereotypical low tier archer unit with 90 unit count, 9,900 health, which means 110 health for each model, 15 armor of the average quality, and once again, great morale, 48, decent speed of 42. Their melee attack and defense are 17 each, which is pretty decent for a range unit, and their melee attack damage is split 28-7 between base and armor piercing, and of course their charge bonus is low at just 15. In terms of range stat, they are just the minimum standard for everything, 20 ammo, 150 range, 23-6 split for range damage, 9 points of accuracy, and a reload time of 6.3 seconds. As an Upper Egyptian unit, they have the same desert and hiding traits as we have seen so far, and for stances, they just have hold. So it should come as no surprise that I think these units are best avoided entirely, as they really have no standout roles in any army to justify having these units take up an army slot. There's no need to build balanced armies early on, so at tier 2, much rather just go all melee and spam Conscripted Axemen versus bring a couple archers, as these don't have flaming shot. They have really no use in any army. Then moving up to tier 3, we start things off with the Upper Egyptian Spearmen, which is going to be your spear and shield frontline infantry for the Upper Egyptian roster. Now, one very important point to note for these tier 3 and higher Upper Egyptian unit is that we're going to start seeing some smaller unit sizes, as this Spearman unit will only have 90 unit count with 13,500 health or 150 health per model. So the health per model here is pretty consistent with tier 3 Spearmen, but you get a lot less units, which in my opinion is a huge weakness for these units. So once we get to tier 3 for Upper Egyptian, things get a little dicey in terms of how we rate their strength, because you'll see that they have pretty much standard Spearman stats, 85 armor, 30 coming from shield, good quality armor. Unfortunately, the shield for them is just going to be 45% range block chance. Morale, outstanding, 58. Speed is decent at 37. It's going to be slower because it's a frontline spear unit. Melee attack is going to be slightly above average at 29, and melee defense is going to be slightly below average by the same amount of 1 point at 36, with 7 coming from shield. Essentially, Upper Egyptian units focus a bit more on melee attack across the board compared to melee defense. So if you see units of the similar tier and type and compare the Upper Egyptian to other native rosters, you'll see the same total points spread between melee attack and melee defense, but the distribution is going to be like 1 point more towards the melee attack and 1 point less towards the melee defense for these units. In this case of a frontline defensive unit, that is not a good thing. Their melee damage is going to be very standard for spear units as well, with 31 to 6 base to armor piercing spread, and they have a 22 point bonus against large or chariots, and their charge bonus is only a 14, as you don't really want to charge with these frontline defenders. In terms of traits, because of their heavy armor, they're not going to be specialized for desert combat anymore, and they will only have hide and forest. In terms of stances, they do have the spear wall, which will give them 25% additional range block chance and charge reflect, and that's going to put their overall charge block chance at 70%. It's respectable, but it's not great, because previously we have covered the Nubian Spearmen from the Nubian and Kush native roster, and their base range block chance on their shield is 65% before the same spear wall formation, which put them at 90%, so it's not even close here. So in summary, the Upper Egyptian Spearman is not a great frontline option because of their smaller unit size, their smaller shield, and small stat shift from melee defense to melee attack. Therefore, unless you're desperate and don't have a better frontline option available, I would just stay away from these units. Next up in the same tier, we have the Upper Egyptian Swordsmen, which is very, very similar across the board as the spear unit, with just some very minor stat changes. Of course, weapon change as well. We have 5 less armor, 2 points shifted from defense to melee attack, slightly higher damage of 32 and 8, so just a slight bump for base and armor piercing, and we lose all bonus damage as we don't have a bonus against large or shield here. We have a much higher charge bonus of 21. But that aside, we have the same traits, hide and forest, stance is back to just hold, and we get a unit ability in Raiders and Razors, which means we can burn nearby buildings. Now, this clearly is the more offensive tier 3 infantry in the roster, but it's actually really bad because of the small unit size. Stat looks great, but when you're bringing about 25% less unit, you're doing a lot worse in terms of direct combat, and there's no special stats on these guys, no special stances. The one burn it down ability with Raiders and Razor really doesn't cut it. So I would much rather have the tier 2 conscripted Axemen, which has higher damage than this unit, and higher melee attack, and better defensive stats, and more unit count on top of that. And you have the Spire bonus, you have all the desert combat trait. So that unit stands out in terms of value for pricing versus this unit here. Then finally, for the last tier 3 unit, we have the Upper Egyptian Javelin Throwers, and these unit will have 10,800 health across 90 unit, which is not a smaller unit size finally. This is the standard unit size for range unit. And this means we get 120 health per model, which is decent. Their armor quality is good, but they only have 20 armor, so it's kind of pointless to get that armor quality rating. Morale, once again, is great, 53, and we have good speed at 42. Melee attack is actually really good at 29, and melee defense is not too bad at 22. The overall damage on their melee weapon is a 22-22 even split between base and armor piercing, and there's even a 5-point bonus against shield. This means they actually use an axe in melee. Charge bonus is also solid at 18, so overall, this range unit will actually do really well in melee. And looking at the range stats, we have 12 ammo, which is okay for Javelin unit, 90 range, very standard. And they have great damage, 18 to 23 split, lots of armor piercing damage, solid 10 accuracy, and a reload speed of just 5.9 seconds. So pretty great unit across the board. Trait-wise, they get all the desert focus, their only stance is hold. And overall, these Upper Egyptian Javelin Throwers are a great unit with outstanding damage both in range and melee. They're a bit of glass cannon in terms of their armor stat, which is typical for all range units. But aside from that, I have nothing to complain, as even the melee attack stats are solid. And you even get a bonus against shielded unit, which means this is the perfect unit to flank around the melee front line, unleash all your javelins on the enemy's best unit, engage them in melee afterwards by charging into them with your high melee damage and bonus against shield. Now moving on to tier 4 units, we have the cream of the crop, and typically the best unit representing the strength or intended playstyle of any native unit roster. In the case of Upper Egypt, the native unit roster does not have a certain specialization, like how Nubia and Kush native unit roster focus only on archers. Instead, the Upper Egypt native unit roster have 4 tier 4 units that can be made into a standalone army just by themselves, as you will end up with a solid range infantry, a decent range chariot, a superb offensive melee infantry, and a great all-around melee infantry as well. And we're going to start our discussion here with the Upper Egyptian Renowned Archer, which is a standard composite bow infantry with 11,700 health and 90 unit count, or 130 health per unit. It has 50 armor at good quality. Morale is once again sky high of 58, and speed is 37. Melee attack of 26 and melee defense of 17 is expected, but it's honestly a bit low, as we have seen some really good stat from the previous Javelin unit in tier 3, but these are archers, so slightly different. And melee damage is okay here, 31 and 18 spread, and there's a 4-point bonus against shield. Charge bonus of 20 is also pretty standard here for a high tier unit. In terms of range stats, we have pretty much the standard stat you expect for composite bow users across the board, 19 ammo count, 190 range, 28 to 12 damage split, accuracy of 11, and reload time of 7.6 seconds. And for flaming shot trait, we have the same huge damage reduction on the composite bow as we have seen before in our Nubia and Kush roster. Essentially, we're losing a chunk of base damage as well as a huge chunk of our armor piercing damage when using the flaming shot and the standard 20 range deduction. Then we have Encourage on this unit, which allows it to boost nearby units' morale. Although this does not stack with the General's Encourage, whichever one has the larger value will take over for the area that they have overlapped in. Lastly, there is Hide in Forests. For stances, we have Hold and Fall Back, which allows for a faster, more organized, and less damaging retreat at the cost of stamina. And finally, for abilities, we have Rapid Fire, which trades 20% of your range for 20% faster reload speed. Ideally, you want to wait till the enemy are roughly 150 meters from you, or the typical lower tier bow range, to activate this, as you will lose 38 range off of this ability, and that's essentially going down from 190 to 150, and the reward is that you go up by 20% reload time, which puts you closer to that 6.3 second reload time of the lower tier bow. So in a sense, you're going from a composite bow stat to a lower tier bow stat with the composite bow damage, while retaining that extra 40 range of damage that you get to do if you micro really well. It's a great ability, just takes a bit of microing as you essentially will increase your damage for that bit that they get closer to you. At the end of the day, there are better, more specialized archers in other native unit rosters, as we have seen with our Nubia and Kush native unit roster guide that we covered last week. And this essentially is a weaker version of the renowned Kushite archer, which has better melee stats, better range stats with better accuracy and higher ammo count. But if you just have access to the Upper Egyptian native unit roster, then these archers are still very decent to consider recruiting, even though they're not going to be the greatest when compared to the entire field. Moving on to the Upper Egyptian Chariots, we have a 28 chariot count unit with 14,560 health, or 520 health per chariot. The speed is going to be 103, and armor is going to be good quality of 55, and these are very standard for medium chariots. Morale 55 is high, and we have melee attack of 23, melee defense of 20. These are terrible stats because these bow chariots are not meant for extended melee combat. You want to use your charge bonus to boost your melee stat and then get out of there and just deal collision damage or range damage with your bow. And the melee damage is going to reinforce this concept as we just have 30 base damage and 17 armor piercing. And this is off only 28 models that's going to be dealing damage versus your infantry where you have anywhere from 90 to maybe 160. Charge bonus of 65 is where we're going to get all our melee damage if we choose to charge with these, as we want to get this added to our melee attack and our melee damage, charge in and out using these chariots. But of course, most of the time you're just going to be using these chariots as mobile archers and kite with them, and they essentially have a composite bow, as you'll see from the 190 range, 28 base and 12 armor piercing missile damage. But unlike composite bow infantry units, we now have 54 ammo, and because we have a smaller unit count of 28, this number translates to just about 18 ammo for a standard 90 unit count of bow infantry, so it's not any better, even though it does look higher on paper. We do have 20 accuracy as our base accuracy, which is great. That will improve our overall damage, and the reload time is also faster for a standard composite bow infantry. We have 6.4 seconds versus the typical 7.6 seconds. This just allows us with 360 degree shooting to kite and shoot more efficiently. And we're going to see that with fire while moving and the mounted sharpshooting traits. Lastly, the hold stance here is meaningless as we're never really going to hold with our chariots. And at the end of the day, the Upper Egyptian chariot is really just a standard medium bow chariot unit with no real strength and no real weakness. As with most Upper Egyptian rosters, we have a bit better morale, which doesn't really mean too much for the chariot. And to get the best out of any chariot unit, you just need really good micro and decision making with the unit during battle. Next up, we have the Upper Egyptian Mace-Axe warrior, which is one of the few units in the game that use this unique and very powerful weapon. It has only 90 unit count and 14,400 health or 160 health per model. It has a good quality armor at 60 points, but it has no shield. Morale once again is sky high at 63 and speed is decent at 41. The base melee attack is one of the highest in the game at 40 and melee defense is not too bad at 26. Melee damage is also sky high with 31 base and 31 armor piercing with 7-point bonus versus shield on top. Charge bonus is also insanely high for an infantry unit at 43. On top of these amazing offensive stats, the unit also carries some throwing projectiles with only 2 ammo of 75 range, but it deals a whopping 17 base missile damage and 26 armor piercing missile damage. And I say whopping here because it's higher than even the Javelin unit. But sadly, the accuracy here is only 8 and the reload time is great at 5.4 seconds, but we only get 2 ammo, so essentially just throw these out before you charge into the enemy infantry. In terms of trait, this unit's going to have Encourage, Shoot while moving for the projectiles, Hide in forests, and most importantly, Flanking attack improve, which increases the combat bonuses one get from flanking an enemy, which is exactly how these units should be used. Now, the stats here is a bit more melee attack. I think usually about 3 points. I think this will double it with the improved bonuses. And it's just going to be tremendous because your base melee attack is already 40. Add on the 43 charge bonus you get. You end up with an offensive powerhouse. For stances, the Upper Egyptian Mace-Axe warriors also double down on their offensive prowess with Reckless Advance, which increases their melee attack by another 6 points at the cost of 4 melee defense points. And this will also advance the unit towards the target location while pushing enemy units aside. So essentially the best way to use this is get your rear charge in normally. After the charge duration ends and you're tangled up with enemy infantry, issue a Reckless Advance order to charge through the side of an enemy unit so you can kind of free yourself while dealing more damage, and then set yourself up for another charge afterward to take advantage of your super high charge bonus. In terms of abilities, they also have the Raiders and Razors ability, which can be used in siege attacks, as you can use Reckless Advance to squeeze through the sides of choke points and then just unleash these guys inside, burning down the settlement. Overall, the Upper Egyptian Mace-Axe warrior is one of the best offensive melee infantry in the game, with unparalleled damage and melee attack stats, making them the must recruit unit from this native unit roster. They are going to be fragile defensively, there's no shield, their armor stats not super high, and they only have 90 unit count, which are slight weaknesses, but given how much they excel offensively, we can overlook much of that. Then moving on to our final unit in this roster, we have the Upper Egyptian Khopesh warriors, which is a more balanced elite infantry compared to the offensive focus Mace-Axe warriors. In terms of their stats, we're going to see the same 90 units, same 14,400 health, 160 per unit. Armor is going to be very high, 95, with 30 coming from their shield, and the shield's still only going to block 45%. Armor quality is going to be good. Morale and speed are going to be great, and same as the Mace-Axe unit at 63 and 37. The melee attack's going to be much lower at 33, but the melee defense can be much higher at 35 with 7 coming from shield, so a much more even and balanced stat. Melee damage, however, is going to be much weaker, as we're going to have just 31 base and 18 armor piercing. There's a 4-point bonus against shield, and a just average charge bonus of 22. They also carry the same 2 ammo projectile as the Mace-Axe unit with the exact same rage stat, which is really, really good. But what set them apart from most balanced infantry in the game is that we will also see flanking attack improved on them as a trait, but on top of that, we also see flanking defense improve, which means when they get flanked, the penalties that you suffer from your melee attack, melee defense will be largely reduced for this unit. So this doesn't really make the Khopesh warrior a defensive unit or frontline unit, because frontline units typically don't get flanked. It's just a frontal charge versus charge, or a defensive brace versus a charge. Instead, this makes the Khopesh warrior the perfect unit to execute certain strategies involving more advanced stances, such as give ground or advance, which are both available on this unit. And the ideas that you can have here is either you can push forward alone towards the enemy unit with advance and become sort of this point of focus with a bunch of enemy units surrounding you, and you survive that with your high overall stats and the improved flanking defense trait. Then have your other infantry counterflank this blob of enemy unit that's formed around your Khopesh warriors, and then wipe them out. Or you can use give ground and kind of suck the enemy unit into an alcove where your other units can then swarm in and create new flanking angles. So that's pretty much the idea behind these unit stances and units of this type, and this is especially good in choke point maps or narrow streets inside settlements, and there's going to be a lot of variability and application of this strategy. Overall, the Upper Egyptian Khopesh warrior is probably one of the most well-rounded melee infantry units in the game and can definitely be recruited into any army. Just know that they are not offensively focused, but instead are great at drawing the enemy's attention or executing certain strategies involving their various stances available. And at the end here, to summarize, of the 11 units in the Upper Egyptian native unit roster, I highly recommend the Upper Egyptian Conscripted Axemen, the Upper Egyptian Javelin throwers, the Upper Egyptian Mace-Axe warriors, and the Upper Egyptian Khopesh warriors. And of these 4, the Mace-Axe warriors rank first as one of the best offensive units in the game. Aside from these 4 units, the Upper Egyptian Chariots, the Upper Egyptian Clubmen, the Upper Egyptian Renowned Archers are all worth consideration, especially if you don't have access to better alternatives. And then finally, we have the last 4 remaining units in the Upper Egyptian Archers, Upper Egyptian Militia Slingers, Upper Egyptian Spearmen, and Upper Egyptian Swordsmen, which are all units that I would never ever consider recruiting. And that brings an end to this guide on the Upper Egyptian native units. Hopefully you have enjoyed it enough to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more guides like these in the future. Next week at the same time on Wednesday, we're going to be covering the Lower Egyptian native unit roster, which is going to look very similar to the Upper Egyptian roster with a slight twist. So definitely stay tuned to this weekly series on the channel until we have covered all the units in Total War Pharaoh. And until then, bye!